Hi, I'm Liz Hirsh Naftali, and welcome to the Capital Coffee Connection podcast. I am sitting here today having virtual coffee with Senator Tammy Duckworth. Yes, me too. I've got mine here. And I'm really excited because I have been a fan and appreciate Senator Duckworth, who I'm going to call Tammy for this interview, because our interview is really about the heart and humanity of our elected leaders. We do not get into the politics and the policy of what's going on, because what I think is really important is that people understand who our leaders are as people, but also who they are and what they believe in from a human value. Because at the end of the day, I believe there's so much more that we share in common than what divides us. And so many times that we spend on the division versus what connects us. So thank you very much. And Tammy Duckworth, Senator from Illinois, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me on. This is very exciting.
So I'm going to do something I do a little bit different this time, because, you know, one of the things when I saw you, when I just did a little more reading, is that you are a woman of many firsts. And I think that, as we all know, you are the first, but we hope you will not be the last, and you will not be. But being a first is always something that is remarkable. And your firsts have covered your personal life and your public life. So I was going to just kind of go through some of them and sort of talk to you about it and ask you what they mean to you personally. Because like the first is about your background. You are the first Thai American woman elected to Congress, and you are the first person born in Thailand who is a member of Congress. And maybe I'll back up and say you are also in the House. You were in the Congress in Illinois, in the United States for Illinois, and then you have become the senator, and you're just finishing your first term. And so what does it mean to be an immigrant? What does it mean to be a first and being able to represent a voice and somebody that the Congress never had before?
Yeah. So, well, first off, I'm not an immigrant. I'm actually native born, natural born American, because my dad's an American citizen.
Okay.
My dad was a two-tour Vietnam veteran. I just happened to be born overseas. But
Right.
I do to bring that almost immigrant perspective, because my mother didn't become a citizen until she was in her 50s. And I didn't speak English till I was 8, because I grew up in Southeast Asia. And my dad went over with the Vietnam War, tried to come home, was very disillusioned, was spit on, all of the terrible things you heard, and immediately just volunteered for a second tour in Vietnam, and then just refused to come back to the States. He was so hurt, because he came from this family. I come from this family line that has been serving in uniform since before the revolution. I mean, there have been my family members directly serving on both the maternal and paternal line on my dad's side, going back to the revolution. And so he was really hurt, because he thought he was doing his duty and what his family had always done. And so I grew up speaking Thai, then moved to the States till I was 16. And so I do bring that perspective with me. But I wasn't trying to be the first. I was just trying to live my life. And I was perfectly happy being a soldier and working for Rotary International, doing helping Rotarians do humanitarian projects around the world. And then, you know, a series of things happened. I got sent to Iraq. I got wounded. And then things started coming my way. Opportunities started coming my way. Challenges started coming my way. And I think something about having been almost killed in Iraq changed my attitude towards life a little bit. And I just decided, what the heck, you know, at least I'm not going to get blown up today. I'll go try it. And I lost my fear of losing and not doing well. And that's how all the first came. I wasn't trying to be first. I was just trying to join Congress. I was just trying to have my children. I was just trying to live my life.
But you know, what's interesting is that while you say you weren't trying to be a first, but there's a lot of people that could have gone through what you experienced and chosen to not to hide, but just to go somewhere else. But you decided to face it head on and to really make a difference. And, you know, I think about like the work you have done for veterans. And, you know, while we don't talk about politics and policy, our veterans are like you and just people that are both Democrat, Republican.
Mm-hmm.
They could have been raised in another country, spoke another language until they were 8, but they come here and they are in America and they are part of one of the most, I think, important parts of our country, which is service to our country. So when you say that you didn't, you know, have something, you just decided to do it, it is something quite special. Can you talk about like where that resilience came from? Because Did it come from growing up in another country? Did it come from your father's experiences? Where do you think it started from?
I think I've always just been, I call myself a plodder, Plodder. I've always
Yeah.
just been like, well, even as a kid, if I needed to get my homework done, I would just like sit down and do my homework and get through it. In the army, when they would like say, it's time to go run 5 miles or 10 miles, and I hate running, I just like, okay, I'm going to run to that next tree and then the next tree and then the next tree. I make lists, checklists. I'm a list checker offer. So
Mhm.
I just like okay, we're going to do this step and then next step and next step towards that goal. So I always had that instinct in me. And then when I was wounded, there was just that and hyper, which was, okay, how do I sit up again? How do I learn to walk again? How do I learn to feed myself again? How do I learn to write again? How do I learn to use my left hand? Because I was right-handed, all those sort of things. It was just like one thing after another. And I think for me that natural instinct was there. But on top of that was the fact that I almost died and I survived. And I survived thanks to the heroism of my crewmates, the other 3 people on the crew of my aircraft who saved my life, who made decisions over and over and over again that put themselves in jeopardy, but in order to save my life. And in the very beginning, they thought they were just saving my body. They didn't even think that I was alive, and they chose to recover my body so that my mom would have something to bury. And they didn't want to see my body dragged through the streets of Iraq, Baghdad on CNN. And so they took the extra time to recover my body. And that's when people realized I was actually still alive. And so that for me is my North Star. It's like, I never want to live a day of my life since that day that I would ever make my buddies ashamed of me or regret that they had saved my life. And so I just, try to do right by them every single day. Plus they'll call me up and kick my butt over the phone
Right. I was going to
if
ask,
I make them mad.
they got you a lot. They saved you, but they also are still there to push you along as well.
Yes. Yes.
That's a beautiful story. And I think that also then you take that and you give what they gave to you, you give to others by public service, which is a beautiful thing.
It's I couldn't serve in uniform anymore and I needed a new mission. And the new mission came. First it was veterans, and then by getting elected to Congress I was motivated to run for Congress because I felt that we were not doing right by all veterans and we needed to do better. And then that led to me running for the Senate.
And I'm going to just back up a second because I know that you grew up you came to Hawaii as a teenager.
Yes.
And coming to a new country as a teenager, a new city, a new school is really challenging. And I just was wondering how that was. And also, if I ask everybody, and I'd love to hear if you had a teacher, especially somebody that saw you as a new person, a new kid in the community that still you think about, or you even have a relationship who really kind of mentored you and supported you at those times.
Well, yes, because when we got to Hawaii, we were destitute. My dad had been unemployed for about 5 years. We were on food stamps. There were many days where if it were not for school breakfast and school lunch, I would not have eaten. I was the only person in my family who could get a job. I got a job for minimum wage after school. So it was a time of desperation and struggle. I sold roses out of a bucket by the side of the road. So anytime I see somebody selling roses out of a bucket on the side of the road, I stop and buy some
Right.
because that was me at 16 and 17. I had a teacher. I had a high school counselor, Mr. Nakamura at McKinley High School, a high school where 80% of the kids were on some sort of food assistance program. He was a high school yearbook counselor, and what he would advise or what he would do, he always made these terrible mistakes, Liz. He would like give us assignments, and then at the end of the day, he'd be like, "Oh my God, guys, I gave you the wrong assignment. Actually, the pages need to be cut 4 inches by 6 inches, not 3 by 5. We're gonna have to redo that layout for the yearbook." And he'd keep us after school, time and time again. We were just like, "Oh my gosh, he's so flighty. He's a lovable guy. What's wrong?" All of us in our beautiful 16-year-old self-assuredness that we know the world. And then at the end of the, assignment would be late and be like, "Oh guys, here's $10. Stop by Taco Bell on your way home. Tacos are 99, 2 for 99 cents. This was the 80s. Get something to eat and go on home, guys." It wasn't until I looked back later to realize all the kids that he kept after school were the kids at the end of the month who were not going to eat dinner that night. And he was coming up with ways to feed us. This public school teacher in a destitute public school where 80% of the kids were on assistance was reaching into his pocket, into his wallet every, 3 or 4 times a week to feed a room full of kids so that they wouldn't go home hungry. Because there were many nights when I went home and I would save my chocolate milk or an apple for my lunch to give to my younger brother so he would have something to eat. And I fainted at school once because I was so underfed. So I think about him all the time because if it weren't for him, I would have dropped out of school and not finished high school. And he kept
Yeah.
me in school because he kept me fed.
Yeah. It's a beautiful story. And, it goes back to special teachers in our lives. And he was very special because he also was making sure that, again, somebody else was making sure that you stayed alive.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah.
beautiful story. Talk a little bit and share a little now as a mother and raising two, young daughters. How do you balance that and between being the mom and making sure that they are taken care of? And I know that you were in homeschooling during COVID, like how do you balance being a mom and giving quality of that, but then also being able to do what you do for the entire state of Illinois and for the Senate? And I also know, and this is another thing that you were the first at, which you were the first woman leader to bring your newborn onto the Senate floor. And talk about what that meant. I mean, I know it's already a bunch of years back, but I sometimes think that people, especially young people, don't understand the work that went before, and they just expect that certain things that we have now have always been, and they are not necessarily worth fighting for or understanding the fight that others did before to get them there.
Well, when I tell young women in particular, when they ask me about work-life balance, I tell them there's no such thing as work-life balance. It's a lie, and it's a lie that is perpetuated in a way that is harmful, especially to young women in the workplace, as if you can do everything. You cannot. There are not enough hours in the day. In my book, I talk about this, how I broke down on the campaign trail as I was running for Senate, because when I was, I had to decide to run for the Senate when I was on maternity leave. And when I was doing my job on the campaign trail and as a congresswoman, I felt that I wasn't doing right by my baby daughter. And when I was with my daughter, I felt like I was letting down my campaign and my donors and my supporters. I should be working harder as a candidate. And I finally broke down. And I luckily have a lot of women on my team, and they just said, Tammy, there's no such thing as work-life balance. And that's when I looked back to my Army training. And in the Army, we have what's called the 80% solution. You would think that in the Army, if you try to plan a mission, you want to plan it to be the perfect mission so that nothing will go wrong. But in fact, the Army plans for the 80% solution and starts movement and start doing the mission. And that way you adjust fires as needed to complete the mission. But if you spent all your time planning, you would never be able to execute the actual mission. It could never actually happen. And so I go with the 80% solution. There are days when my girls, when I pack their lunch in the morning, they're not going to get, a nice note from me and my mommy made everything. They're going to get a Lunchable and a juice box and maybe a Rice Krispie treat. It's all prepackaged, and it's not the way, I would rather it be, but that's what they're going to get. There are times when they're going to go to bed in leggings and a sweatshirt because that's what they're wearing to school tomorrow. But hey, they're dressed and they're on the school bus, right? The other thing, aside from, my girls, was the fact that accepting the 80% solution in my life was forcing the people that I work with to accept the parameters of my being in the workplace. And that meant that when I got pregnant with my second daughter, it took 9 months, not just for the pregnancy, but to negotiate being allowed to bring her onto the floor, because in the Senate, you have to be on the floor physically to vote. There's no remote voting. And so I knew I couldn't vote because the only way for me to vote, the only path for me to get to where I could do my thumbs up or thumbs down, the only accessible way that I could go with my wheelchair was to physically be on the floor. And I couldn't leave my baby outside, and I couldn't leave, and I was breastfeeding at the time. So it took 9 months of negotiations, but 10 days after I gave birth, I brought my baby daughter onto the floor to vote because they needed my vote. And then also setting other parameters. I don't take meetings before 9:30. I drop my daughters off at 8:30, and then I come into work. And so if you want me in person, I'm not going to show up before 9:30. And there are earlier meetings, and I tell folks, sorry, if you want me there, that's not going to happen. If there's going to be a committee hearing or something, I'm not going to be there. You need to do it later, because we say we support women. We say we support working families.
Absolutely.
And yet we have these crazy days in the Senate where no parent can be a parent because you got to drop your kid off at 5 a.m. to be at work by 6:30, and then you don't get done till 9. It's crazy. So we have to change the institutions and instill that work-life balance the best we can. So I've
Yeah.
changed a lot of rules within my own Senate offices.
Good.
we have 12 weeks of parental leave for both men and women.
Right.
We give leave for giving birth to a child, but also adopting or fostering, or we give leave if somebody has a miscarriage. People deserve to be able to live up to their personal obligations. And you know what? I have very low turnover in my office. And I'm really fortunate because I have really great staff who've been with me, over 5 years, some of them 10, 12 years. And I hope
Yeah.
that's because they feel that they're treated well in the office. And then those policies that recognize people's personal lives in the workplace are critically important.
It goes back to like looking out for other folks. Like we're supposed to look out for each other. It is not one against the other. And I also believe that as women, we have to be very careful to make sure we take care of ourselves. Because if we take care of ourselves, then we can take care of our children and we can take care of the workplace that we find ourselves in. But the minute that Tammy doesn't take care of Tammy, the other stuff can't be well attended to. And I also just go back to one thing about your daughters, which is that, they may have a Lunchable, which my kids always really liked, by the way, but they know that they get to have you drop them off and they get the hug and they get the love. And at the end of the day, that's what really children are craving. And I think that's what people who work with you also are craving, which is just to be in a place where they feel heard, but they are loved and respected. And I admire that the 80-20, but at the end of the day, it's the quality, not always the quantity of the time.
Very true. Very true. And I try to be there for all of my girls' events and all of that. Don't always make it. Or sometimes I take them with me. They can get to come to work with me, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah. And again, another story, another piece that I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you're passionate about it and you spoke about it at the convention, but you also are very focused on IVF. And IVF should not be a political, because Republican women, Democratic women, unfortunately, we all find that there are women on all spectrums, all religions, all races that struggle to get pregnant. And could you just talk about your work from a human perspective, what it means to you? It's not about a vote, but it's really about what IVF actually was able to do for you and your family, but other women, and why it's important for you to keep pushing this to make sure it's available for all women.
So the IVF journey is really tied to my military service. I was very much focused on making my rank and like my Army career. I wanted to command my own battalion. And so when you're a pilot, like I was, being pregnant grounds you. So you can't fly. And if you can't fly, then you can't compete. And you can't compete, you can't get promoted. And so by the time my husband and I decided that the timing was right, I'd commanded my own company. I was going back to a desk job. Okay, now's the time to get pregnant. That happened to fall right when a month later I was deployed to Iraq. And so it's okay, I'll come back from Iraq. We'll think about starting our family then. By now I'm 34, 35. Well, of course, I get wounded and spend 13 months in the hospital. And so by now I'm 38. We start talking about trying to have a baby. I go to my VA women's health doctor. She said, all right, let's try. Go ahead and try to get pregnant. And a year goes by. I'm still not pregnant. Now I'm in my early 40s as the days go by. And I get referred to a hospital because the VA doesn't do fertility treatments. At least they didn't then. So I got referred to a hospital that the VA was in partnership with. And I meet with a fertility doctor who won't even take me to her clinic. She just meets me in the waiting room. He goes, no, you're almost 42. You're too old. There's no fertility treatments for you. There's no assisted reproductive technology. You just go home and enjoy your husband. And I believed her. By this point, I thought I was too old to have children. My husband thought it was a great advice from the doctor, of course, because he's a man. He's like, sure. And it wasn't until I was at a leadership event, women in leadership event, where I mentioned that this is a regret. Now I'm 44, 45. And I said, one of my regrets is that I waited too long. And now there's no assisted reproductive technology that worked for me. And this woman executive in the group came up to me and said, that is not true. What are you talking about? You can get pregnant. You got to go to this, you got to go to this doctor at Northwestern Medical Center. And I said, oh, no. And I blew her up. And this strange woman that I'd never met before, called me and followed up with me every month for 6 months. And I finally just went just to, by this point, I had got to know her. I know she was, well-intentioned. Her name is Judy Gold. She's an attorney in Chicago. And she sends me to Dr. Confino. at Northwestern University. Within 18 months of seeing Dr. Confino, I had my babies. I had my
Beautiful.
first baby at 46. And what had turned out was my VA hospital was in partnership with a Catholic hospital. And that doctor was not allowed to tell me about the things that the Catholic Church didn't support. And
Right.
so I've written this piece of legislation that says that all Americans have a federal statutory right to access IVF if you want to. And if you are a doctor and you want to provide IVF, you don't have to, but if you want to, you have a right to provide it. And if you're an insurance company and you want to cover it, you have a right to cover it. And then when I was in the House of Representatives and I was covering the Afghanistan and Iraq and all of that, we started seeing more and more men wounded in Afghanistan. Unlike me in Iraq, a lot of us who were wounded in Iraq were wounded by rocket-propelled grenades like me, or if they were in convoys on the road, they tended to lose limbs. In Afghanistan, these guys, mostly guys, were on foot patrol stepping on landmines, and they started losing their reproductive organs. They were surviving, but now they can't have children without getting donated sperm or using IVF. And so in my piece of legislation also is language that says, before you go off to war, we will cover you freezing your eggs or sperm. And Dr. Confino, who was he's gone now, my fertility doctor, actually was a doctor in the IDF, in the Israeli Defense Forces. And he looked at me and said, Tammy, how many times have you been x-rayed? And I said, well, I don't know. I was x-rayed every day, daily, when they were trying to save me. And I was x-rayed daily for months. I was in surgery every other month. He goes, that is why you are infertile. It's your military service. We see this around the world, where there's a much higher rate of infertility among both men and women who served in the military than those who did not. And so I feel very passionately about extending access to all reproductive technologies. If you choose to access it and you want it, you should be able to. I'm not forcing it on anyone, just saying you should have a right to do that and start your family. Because I desperately wanted to start my family, and I'm so grateful I have my two beautiful daughters today.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing it, because first that you're sharing your personal story and then what you've done with it. But I also, this whole thing about it's a woman's issue, what you've just described, first, we know it's not a women's issue because it takes a man and a woman to get that baby. But at the same time, like that, this is also something, the work that IVF legislation, IVF work, it is directly affecting men who, like you said, can become sterile by serving in in the military, which is, I didn't know that before. I didn't think about that before. So thank you.
Yeah. So it's not always traumatic. I mean, it's just the rates of infertility within our veteran community is very high. It's much higher for both men and women than the general population.
Well, and also when we tend to study things, heart disease, we used to study men more than women. But then we realized, and here you are, this is something that would be normally, you would think is a woman's issue, but then the husband comes home and he can't help to have a baby. So I think it's all, it just tells a lot about that we're all in this together, It's not just one side or the other.
It's a human condition.
It's
and
a
we're
human
all
condition.
human.
That's why we talk about it from a humanitarian perspective, which is it affects all of us. One other question that I've asked everybody, and you sort of talked about a little bit, but what is the best advice you've ever received and the worst advice you've ever received? And what is the advice you give to young people or to women or people that you feel like you can influence?
I think the best advice, it was really more the experience of not being afraid to fail. I was, I was more of a perfectionist when I was younger, and I would try very hard to not let people see me fail. So I would try things that I knew I could do, or practice, and then reveal it, not let anybody know I was doing it. But when you run for Congress, it's kind of an obvious thing, right? And that was for me, huge when I first ran for Congress and lost. I mean, I was devastated. But really, I had gained the confidence to fail, so that when opportunities came my way along the way to either run for Congress or to run for Senate or to do whatever, I started realizing, you know what? It's okay. I'm not getting blown up today. This is good. I can try this. And so not putting a value judgment on yourself because you fail at something, I think was really good advice. What I say to young women is, don't accept the labels and judgment and value that society puts on you because of your gender. And so we, a lot of, throw like a girl, a lot of derogatory, language that question men's ability to be, tough, whatever, by saying, don't be,
Yes.
And so what I've told my young women especially is like, trust your instincts, because your instincts will make you better. I tell this story where I was a young company commander. I was a platoon leader. I just took leadership, and I was the first female pilot in this unit, the only female pilot in this unit. And in Chicago, it's very cold in the wintertime, and I get very cold, but you don't want to give caffeine to your flyers because you don't want them to get the shakes. And so I started putting out hot cocoa for my guys when we had those early morning missions, in a cold January day in Chicago. And the other platoon leader started going, "Ooh, Tammy, mama platoon leader putting hot cocoa out for her boys, aren't you good?" That I was coddling my men, that it was such a girly thing to do. And of course, I took the hot cocoa away because I was 20 something and insecure in myself. And then you know what? My mission readiness rate went down. My guys were better at doing their jobs when they were warm and comfortable than when they were out there freezing. And so I realized that my instinct to provide hot cocoa, if it was maternal, whatever it was actually a good instinct. And I put
Yes.
that back because my guys started kicking the other unit's butts, because my guys were warm and comfortable instead of cold and miserable out there in, 3 a.m. on a January day in Chicago.
That's a good story. And it also just goes to show that you also paid attention, because a lot of women would probably just not done it again, but you saw that their effectiveness went down. So it was like you knew that you had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that story, because hot cocoa is an answer to a lot of people's needs. This is the part where I just ask a bunch of rapid questions
Okay.
just to get to know who you are. You can answer with one word or a sentence, but they're pretty easy. The first is, what is your favorite color?
Okay.
I'm sure your daughters like that color
Mm-hmm.
too. Your favorite sound?
My girl's laughing.
Your favorite smell or scent?
Roses.
And who's your biggest cheerleader?
Myself.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Your favorite ice cream flavor?
Strawberry.
And if you had you're on a deserted island and they said you can have whatever meal you want, what would you pick?
So it would be a Thai meal. It's a green vegetable that's like a spinach. It's called pak bung phai dang. It's a very common regular meal. It's just rice and this vegetable that's stir fried with this bean paste. It's really the most amazing thing, and it's like my
You know how to
go-to
make it?
comfort food. I do, and some fried spam to go with it because I did spend some time in Hawaii.
Yeah, yeah. You all have some pretty good teams there in Chicago. What's your favorite sport? What's your favorite team to follow?
The Cubs. My dad, both my dad and I were baseball umpires, so it's got to be baseball. Although I love volleyball, and I just spent some time at the Paralympics, watching the Paralympics, and now I think I might want to start playing wheelchair rugby because that looked like fun.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good. Because you have so much free time, Tammy. I'm not sure when you'll do it, but knowing you, you will find a way. And you probably will be in the Paralympics in 4 years. So I'm
Oh
going to
my
watch.
gosh. It was so exciting watching the Paralympians. They just like made you want to go out there and do it too.
I hear you. I hear you. I'm telling you, I'm going to be looking in 4 years in Los Angeles. I'm going to be watching out for you. I think we've already talked about this, but I love this question. What is your superpower?
I think my superpower is not giving up, just plodding along. I used to think that, I wish I was a sprinter, I wish I was a rabbit, but I'm glad I'm a plotter, that I'm just that mule that's just going to keep on putting one foot in front of the other.
And if you had a perfect day where you did not have to be in Washington, D.C. or in the office in Illinois, what would you do? What would be your perfect day?
With my girls on the beach.
Yeah, sounds lovely. And is there a place that you've wanted to take them that you haven't taken them yet?
There's so many places I would love to take them that I haven't taken them yet. I think I would love to. Well, I took them to Paris because we were able to go to the Paralympics. I led the delegation to that, and I brought my girls. I was really pleased to do that. I would love to take them to Africa. I'd like to take them to Egypt and go see the pyramids. And having seen those, I think it's just an amazing wonder of the world that I think, just open their horizons and let them see the world. I took Abigail at 6 months to Israel. She was the youngest to ever go on a congressional delegation because I took her with me. But I would love to take Miley there as well because we had a good time as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you have plenty of time to take them, but the list is long. I mean, you're an adventurer and you want to give them those opportunities, which I think is also so interesting because even though when you came to Hawaii, you didn't have much, you lived such a rich life in terms of travel and understanding cultures. And I think that's also probably one of the characteristics that gives you strength as a person.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is my last question. And this is a question that I've asked each leader. What does joy mean to you? What brings you joy? And if you have joy, how do you share that with others? It could be personal and as a leader.
I mean, my joy is just love. I think you have both. And love doesn't have to, it's love for everything, love for life, love for others. Obviously my girls are all the joy in my world, and listening to their little belly laughs, and that brings me joy, and making them happy gives me joy. And I just hope that people find whatever it is that makes them that unreservedly, blissfully happy. And I think when you get there, then you have an abundance of love to pass on to others.
Beautiful. And thank you for taking the time to share yourself and, to share your true person, because I watched a bunch of your interviews, and, you always have to be doing something that's maybe political or something that has, that you're trying to accomplish. But what I think you've done here is just really shared who you are, and also given people an understanding that you don't just wake up one day and you're a senator. You have a life and a struggle and a balance, and trying to figure it all out, and understanding that you're just going to keep, like you said, plodding along. You don't necessarily have all the answers, even now as we speak today.
Exactly. Thank you.
Hi, it's Liz. Please join me every Tuesday for coffee to talk about heart and humanity with our elected leaders. Remember to hit subscribe to get an alert when a new episode is live and for exclusive content. Ciao.